So to kind of pick up from that place. So we both, all of us, all four of us, right, can viscerally feel in our bodies. In the book of Job, through my body I vision God.
Yeah.
Before I even begin a conversation, right, the pain of that baby. And when I think of, any baby, and I have four kids, and you kind of get that motion, in that sense of, the baby losing connection. That's a tragic moment. And yet, when Winnicott talked about good enough parenting, there is no baby that is fully received by a parent. And here, I want to kind of, to borrow a word from you, viscerally, kind of object to the deification of couplehood, right, at the expense of singularity, right? And really kind of, I'm going to borrow a Hebrew word here, because Hebrew words are always helpful. So the word special is yichud, Y-A-C-H-A-D. It's also the word for oneness. It's the word for togetherness. So yichud and yachad mean both I'm special in the sense of being singular, and at the very same time, it means we're together, we're bonded, we're integrated, we're one. Right? So in the Shema prayer, the famous declaration of the Shema, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, echad. Echad means special, meaning unique and singular, and together. And I think we need critically to hold that dance. Because in the same way, right, and just you're about to have another visceral reaction, so prepare, right? And in the same way that at a certain moment, philosophies reified the state, the great experience of togetherness, right, at the expense of the individual, there's also a danger in reifying couplehood, right, and not it being in constant, gorgeous dance with the singularity, and actually couplehood and singularity, connection, and the single one who's not disconnected, but is internally connected, right? Because connection doesn't only exist between two people. And I think that's the key here. And I think that might just open the space. So if I can kind of go and kind of open up the space of love. When we talk about love, the last thing I think we want to do is reduce love to a human phenomena. Because love exists between, but not only between, right, people, it exists between the I and the thou on all levels. So the initiating energy of the cosmos, which made the unmanifest become manifest, right, was love, right? And then when quarks decide to bond together, right, in this strange allurement they have between them, a single boundary, falls around them, right? That's because there's an animating eros of evolution. And then these atoms come together, it happens again, and they become molecules, and the molecules come together, and they become these complex molecules, then they awaken into life, into individual cells, which then become complex cells, which then become early plant life, which become later plant life, early animals, later animals, into a human being. Then the human being emerges from kind of egocentric consciousness to kind of ethnocentric consciousness, larger field of love, togetherness, and concern, from ethnocentric to world-centric, a larger field of, to cosmocentric. I'm identified with all sentient beings and everything that ever was, is, or will be. So there's a movement of love and in-betweenness that moves throughout. And we need to locate ourselves in an evolutionary context and actually feel the awakened evolutionary impulse, the ecstatic evolutionary impulse that pulsed the world into being, living, awake, and alive in us as singular beings who are in connection with everything. I'm in connection with Gaia. I'm in connection with the evolutionary impulse, and I align not with my ego, but with the evolutionary impulse. I align with Lori in this kind of unique and singular relationship, right? I fall in love with Harville, right, in a different way, right? We don't want to make the romance thing public now, so we're gonna, So I fall, right? It's too early. But in other words, we love in many ways, right? And one of the ways we love, one beautiful, gorgeous way we love, one awesome way we love, is in this couple space. But when the book of Matthew or Leviticus 19 talked about love your neighbor, it didn't say love your pair bonded couple. It didn't say love your child. It said love other, right? And love is a perception. It's the perception of the infinite uniqueness, specialness, and gorgeousness of another that binds us, right? Because we're all expressions of that consciousness and love. And so I don't want to exile love into couples, right? I don't want to lose the larger evolutionary context, right? I don't want to lose, that core and profound dialectical, gorgeous dance between yichud and yachad, between the individual who's connected internally, connected to all that is, and the individual who connects to other. And the risk I see is the idolatry of couplehood. Right? That would be the shadow. Right? Couplehood is one gorgeous expression of the essential connectivity of the cosmos. Right? That if you guys point out, I think it's like on page 36 or 37, in the beginning of Getting the Love You Want, you've got one beautiful page at the end of the section where you talk about 10 different examples of pairs. How that you talked earlier about AC/DC, right? So and that pairness, right, is the stuff of essence, and couplehood's one expression of it, but one, right? So once we've said that, then we can add the last piece, which is now the way that couplehood is established is through the tragedy of the falling away, right? In other words, there is no couplehood. There is no I thou, right? Without actually there being a hyphen in between. And the hyphen in between is the mysterious human tragedy. I mean, anyone who would claim to explain it, Harville, Helen, Lori, I'd stop talking to, right? Anyone who's going, this is why it happened. I don't know. Complete, utter, I don't know. Mystery. But I do know that the nature of the mystery is that we need to be post-tragic. Meaning we can't bypass the tragedy. We have to embrace the tragedy of human existence, embrace it with full, radical, outrageous love. Because the only response to a world of outrageous pain is outrageous love. And outrageous love is connectivity, but there's for whatever reason, right, we have to spend our lives, right, overcoming, right, that rupture, and knowing at the same time in this strange, holy, mysterious paradox is that there actually isn't connection without the possibility of rupture. It just doesn't exist. It's not possible, right? And so do we want to get to a world of maximum connectivity? We do. Will there ever not be a rupture? I think what we can do is, I think we can up-level the rupture. Meaning, I think what we can do is we can up-level the tragic dimension of the rupture through the evolution of consciousness, which is the evolution of love, which is the evolution of God, right? We can up-level so that the rupture isn't tragic in the sense of shame, but that we always have the space in between, which engenders enough disconnection to create connectivity, which generates creativity, which generates new beauty. So I think we can up-level the rupture. I think that's what we can do. We can keep up-leveling it, but we're never going to get to oneness without separateness, right? They're always going to be at play. So that's a kind of a danced, kind of engaged response.
Well, why don't I do a segue
Please.
again? In that, what I'm hearing you say is that any discussion within Imago of the primacy of the couple, you just want to recognize that the individual is so important. That's our essence, and we're connected to everything. And do we need to make couplehood so primary? And if I got that right. And I think I really validate why you would question any statement that the couple is like the only way for deepest healing or something like that. But just it's a very valid point. But one thing that really impacted me in reading the quantum theory about 15 years ago was the wavicle.
Right.
I thought, well, I now get it, that we function as the particle and we function as the wave. And knocked on Harville's study and go, is not this the definition of the self? That we are both individual and connected at our essence, and it just turns on a dime. And so, absolutely, we would never give up our pride in our right to care for, our right to identify ourselves as individuals. And Harville, I almost think that the idea of like maintaining connection, the connected state, never allows for the differentiation where the individual gets formed in order to reconnect. I mean, to me, it's a healthy thing.
Exactly.
The breaking of the connected status has a valid place.
That dance.
And to me, I think that, well, but I would go back and say that the reason Imago lifts up the primacy of the couple, which I so appreciate in my beloveds, honing in on this, and because I go, yes, is because that's the hardest place to love.
Yeah.
That is the place everyone, it's the smelliest, it's the stinkiest. I mean, that's where you see another human being at their worst. And so sure, you're going to go out and work at the soup kitchen or love your neighbor or stuff like that. And it does, so we think the soup kitchen is wonderful, the neighbors is wonderful, but can we create the inner fortitude to be able to stay present for the one? And most of us can't. I mean, we've both been divorced, but we still hold that eventually. I mean, we had someone in one of our workshops 3 years ago, and Harville often says, "Who's the youngest couple here?" "Oh, we've been dating for 6 months." "Who's the oldest couple here?" And so he said, "How long have you been married?" And 65 years. 65 years, that's the oldest couple. And they said, "What are you doing in a marriage workshop if you've been married 65 years?" And he said, "We want to get it right before we die." And so, let's keep trying. I mean, we keep failing, but to get back in and have as a goal developing the inner strength to be loving of that one person that we do think we would still posit that that's where the real growth is, because that's where the hardest job is. And my final comment is that I feel we need more love that's about a fierce love. And this is where I don't mind the anger as being a part of it, or the sorrow, or can love triumph in the midst of anger or sorrow or brokenness? And that's how love moves from a saccharine state, a peaceful state, to a fierce state. And I have this vision that we've had a global civilization based on war. Like, who wins? Then they get to control the map, and then they get to set the rules, create an empire. We've had global structure based on economic prosperity. We have, what if one day we had a global civilization based on love? And for that love to get strong, that's what the most important things in our lives are, our relationships. And so I just think that that's a very worthy calling that I think all four of us have.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, first of all, I want to appreciate your statement about deifying couplehood. And I also want to say that I don't think we deify couplehood. I
don't think you do either. I mean, that would be the shadow of that position.
Yeah.
Right?
But I do think that at the ontological level, or if it's not ontology, that the level of physicality, materiality, nature itself, that it appears that nature has a dyadic structure. And I mean, it appears that way.
Right.
And, and one of the little pieces of that comes from the quantum physics guys is the pair creation, that no particle ever comes out of the void without being accompanied by another particle, which kind of mirrors the creation story in the Old Testament.
And this is what, Laura, you referred to, the opposites. I mean, everywhere there's a yin-yang, hot, cold, up, down. I mean,
absolutely.
The duality of nature is
it's always there,
replete.
And so given that, and the yin and yang, the genetic code, the double helix, breathing in and out, perception is right, left, up, down. So anyway, we've been through all of those things as a way to make a case for the primacy of couplehood, but not the deification of couplehood, but the primacy of couplehood. We're talking about human couplehood, and certainly there are connections outside of couples. I mean, you and I have a connection. We're not a couple. and Bertha and I have a connection. We may be a couple, I don't know, but the way we love each other. So that there's no argument there. I think where and I also want to say that I think that that the way to keep from losing the self
Right.
in the relationship is to understand that there is no self to lose. That what is real is the oscillation, like in the particle.
The wavicle.
The wavicle. It's the movement between particularity and cosmic.
Right.
It's wave particle that's here and everywhere at the same time. That's an oscillation. So there's no particle.
Right.
There's no wave. It's the oscillation between the two is the only constant.
Right.
So in a sense, couplehood is an oscillation between polarities. So in that sense, there's no partner and partner. Our partnership is the oscillation between us, and we co-create each other in that oscillation, or we destroy each other in that oscillation, depending on what we insert into the path.
And so I love this conversation about
Right.
where are we right in I mean, it's a continuum.
Right.
We both know the we is important, but
Right. That's a great
where's
dance.
the focus?
It's
Yes.
no, it's
Yes.
yeah. No.
So it's the oscillation
Right.
rather than the polarity that's real, because the polarities can shift, but the oscillation is constant. So another model that I use to think about this is the brain is made up of, I lose the number, but 3 trillion cells, or
Lot.
50 billion, or a lot
Lots.
of cells. And those cells are a function of their context. They're not in themselves possible without their context. And they're all dispensable, but they were, as you would say, the unique self has its value, even though you're going to go away after 70, 80 years, and the cell after 7 years is going to be replaced. So there's something special about even the fact of your dispensability. You are nevertheless necessary, and you're therefore that important. So that it's that sense of
Right.
of no singularity that seems to me that is a conceptual framework that arose in the traditions of the Western world, especially, that focused on a singular God, and that was transmitted down to the importance of men, and that got transmitted then into the importance and the Enlightenment and the rise of science, into the importance of the individual, and that so that the whole intellectual framework of the Western world has idolized singularity.
Right.
And I think the case that we're beginning to make, and we're not probably educated enough or intelligent enough to establish the case, so that's incontrovertible. So at the moment we can make an argument, is that was a serious error, and that it's in a sense responsible for the human tragedy. And that if there had been more clearly a relational metaphysics and a relational theology, if there had been a female with the male God, if there had been the cherubs had been there with God, and the real stuff showing up between the male and female gods, we would have had a different a story against which to frame ourselves and explain ourselves and honor or dishonor ourselves. Because what rose out of that was that we were bad. And Augustine took it and inflated that into, in sin. Did my mother conceive me? I think that was the worst story you could possibly put into a human species narrative.
Right.
And for that reason, I see Augustine I see him as, I wish Origen's theology had become the dominant theology, as it is in the East, and it had become that in the West. So you see there's a lot of emotional and visceral and cognitive objections to this focus on singularity, on sin, and on personal salvation. Protestantism did a great injury, but it was necessary, in my mind, in the 16th century, for the self to be extracted from the church. And so Luther said, I can go to God without the intervention of a religious
Right.
church or being or
Right.
a ritual. I mean, here I am.
Absolutely.
And I agree with that.
Right.
But it's really wrong. You can't
it's a
experience
stage along
God
the way.
outside of a community.
Right.
You know, because you can't be outside of a community.
Right.
And so consequently, the radicalization of the individual, I think, was necessary. Now, talk about tragic goods.
Right.
And it was necessary and tragic.
Right.
And that we've now run its course in consumerism and individualism
Right.
and in romantic love and
Right.
all the kinds of things in which the self is the center, narcissism.
Right.
It's run its course, and that what's emerging is a new story.
Right.
And the new story is the story I think you're giving birth to.
We're giving
and that
birth
we're
together.
giving birth
That's
to
right.
that.
That's
to a new
actually
story.
right here. That we're actually to different poles of this new story.
Yeah, and that's and the new
are
story is that
oscillating.
there
Right,
is
that they're
no
oscillating.
such thing as an individual.
Right.
And that is a destructive story. It's a pathological story. It's destroying
Right.
the planet.
Right.
And that this new story brings us into, brings us into relationship. In this new story, we discover
That's right. We reveal.
that we are connected. And when you discover that, you have then a new ethic.
Right.
And the ethic is my self-care. The most selfish thing in the world I can do for myself is to love another person.
Right.
The most selfish thing I can do is take care of the planet. And if I start taking care of me and don't take care of the other and the planet, I'm injuring myself. That is a radical shift in consciousness, which
That's right.
we want to popularize
Absolutely.
and go for that. So I think that's my visceral response.
That's what
to
we're-
that,
yeah.
that singularity seems
yeah.
to me to be a deification of singularity.
Right.
If we're going to
Absolutely.
use that term, the deification of singularity would be equally as destructive as a deification
Agreed.
of couplehood. But that there is some reality in the oscillation and the fact that we are ontologically bound,
Yeah.
not psychologically bound, ontologically bound. And when we don't experience that psychologically, then everybody needs us. They need the therapist, or they need education, they need the church,
Right.
or they need drugs, or they need something.
Right.
Because the anxiety of not feeling
Yeah.
the connection that we are is so terrifying that we then will do anything we can to not feel that anxiety, including kill ourselves.
Amen. Yeah.
So,
Amen. So that's what I know. One, I'm completely with you. Maybe Helen and Lori, why don't you guys say a couple of things? If you have any last thoughts, and then maybe I'll kind of finish it up. Is that okay?
Where are you going?
Yeah. Well, this might be such an oversimplification as to be not useful, but
not from you.
no, it might be. But I mean, I actually think we're all in agreement, because there's no more potent vehicle for the person to become the full flowering of their unique self than with the safety created by a partner in that space between the two of them. And, you know, Eric Fromm said, if I love you only as you, and then it's like, I'm paraphrasing, but sort of just an extended egoism.
Yeah.
But if I love you, and through you, I love me and all humanity and everything that is in Birth of the Dog, then, you know, that's love. And so I think when people begin to become aware of their unique self and begin to unfold in that way, it's often in the sacred space created by an other who is able to see and allow the evolution of one another's unique selves. But in that, each person then connects within and connects without, I think at every level. I mean, that's really the full flowering. It extends in all directions, between, within, everywhere.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, I guess I'll just applaud all the efforts of the four of us to architect a theoretical structure around something that is such a mystery. Like, we just
Right.
have really no idea what's going on. Or we know some things that are going on, but we don't know where the source of love is, or
Right.
what love really is. And yet I think all of us are almost obsessed with this sense of how do we steward love well?
Right.
Because love is just so inexplicably wondrous. You know, where did that come from in this material world, universe? Why is it there? And so I guess I just want to bow in humility that in spite of the different theoretical positions and the angles, that the beauty of getting to know the two of you more and know your earnestness and longing to bring greater insight and clarity and light to how we configure, so that we can configure more wisely.
Yeah.
I mean, you all are just amazing, and to get to be your partner, Harville, is just
Same
the.
to you.
So.
This is pillow talk for us.
So, with that, we
Yeah.
look to you for a closing.
Yeah, no, I mean, when you just feel into the truth that this is a conversation between individuals, but also between couples, there's something very beautiful about that new form of conversation, and to kind of really honor it in its utter beauty and all of the sets of relationship, primary and the unfolding of just the deep desire to recognize that love is not weak, love is strong, right? You know, we kind of think of love as kind of the area of which you referred to earlier as kind of, you know, the soft area, you know, but actually love is the strongest force in the universe. I mean, it is what causes atoms to become, you know, molecules. It is the force of allurement and connectivity, right, in the all. And because of that, you know, and I want to kind of return to, you know, and close with that. And I don't want to bring us all into complete agreement, not only because it would be slightly boring, but we would also lose the kind of unique singularity of each holding a slightly different kind of tension in the best sense of the word, you know, the gorgeousness of the dance. And so, and I feel like Harville and Helen, you're calling us back to couplehood in the sense that that's the primary vehicle where you really have to face everything and avoid nothing. You know, you can't escape into platitudes, right? You can't escape into kind of a generally good feeling. You have to really work the darkness, and you really realize that kind of old text in Ecclesiastes, greater is the darkness than the light. So the Kabbalists reread it, greater is the light than the darkness, excuse me. The Kabbalists reread it, greater is the light that comes from the darkness, right? That, you know, you move past this kind of binary light-dark, that when you actually go through everything together and you stay in this love, which is a perception of the infinite, you know, gorgeousness of the other, and also feels the brokenness of the other, and heals it in that love, right? And that takes place in couplehood, and perhaps sometimes we broaden love, right, too wide in order to avoid, right, that ultimate invitation of couplehood. And I think that you're calling us to that, and we certainly want to heed the call, and we think that call is, if I can use the we here, utterly essential, and we're in radical not only support but agreement and devotion. Really devotion, I want to kind of, you know, devotion to what you're doing, which is just beyond awesome. You know, and at that same moment, I'd like to kind of expand couplehood, right? You know, I'd like to expand love and to recognize that love lives in so many ways, and that actually in the old world, people felt like they had to work it out one way or the other between each other, and usually didn't. And so settled for quiet desperation in the in-between space, because they needed to, because that was the structures that were necessary in order to, you know, make a living, be respectable, you know, create a next generation, which seemed to be a necessity. And so people lived in the quiet desperation of couplehood, right? There's this invitation that you guys that you guys would be incorrect, that you're coupling and leading, right, to this much larger vision of couplehood as the sacred space in between. And at the same time, there's this whole new possibility of couplehood happening in so many different places. And so there's so many different relations of couplehood that we should actually be forced to work it out in. There's so many different dyadic relationships, right? And I actually want to call us to the necessity between teacher and student, work out that complexity. Between colleagues, work out that complexity. Between co-CEOs of a company, work out that complexity. That
Between
actually,
Democrats and Republicans.
right, work out that complexity, right? And that there's so many dyadic relationships, and in some sense, I don't want to exile, right, the utterly sacred call, right, to the highest form of in-betweenness, right, to the couple relationship, right, between whoever the couple happened to be, right, the romantic couple, right? Let's expand the couple beyond the romantic couple, right, and say the romantic couple models, right, what could happen in couplehood in the world, because the world's filled with couples, and the romantic couple, right, is a model which also has this sexual, gorgeousness, and therefore a whole other realm in it. But ultimately, right, it's a model for couplehood everywhere. And so I would be very, very wary of the deification of the ego self, the deification of the individual, right? We got lost there. And I completely agree with your very beautiful unfolding of we got lost in the single God, right, and in the chosen people, right, and in the one. We got lost in the one, right? Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is two, right? Shekhinah and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the masculine and feminine God, the two cherubs. And we need to move past a pathological singularity, but not into, right, a pathological, right, one form of couplehood, which is the romantic couple. The romantic couple is an expression of couplehood, of dyadicness, and that all of those, the two co-workers that have worked side by side, right, that actually don't work it out with each other and both go home to their spouses and complain about each other for 20 years because they feel only obligated to work it out between them and their romantic couple partner. No, they've got to work it out. They've got to love each other. And they've got to get to a deep and a profound love of each other, right? And the liberation, right, of essence is going to happen when couples on all levels, right, whether they're co-workers, whether they're co-CEOs, whether they're two people on a camera crew together who are working together, for 10 years, they've got to work it out. It happens in couplehood, just not in romantic couplehood only. Romantic couplehood perhaps is the strange attractor. If we can heal that, that'll be the model of what can be. Then we expand to love that exists,
So could I comment on that?
Please.
Before we start, because
we've just started this conversation.
we just started this conversation. It's just getting interesting, and that's not true. It's been interesting all along. But as I'm listening to that, I think we are in agreement because it's just that we have located our energy with romantic couples.
Right.
It started off as just simply it was a career. And then as we move from career into trans-career interest.
Calling.
That was a calling. I often think about callings suck because you don't get to do what you want to do. Then you have to go do what somebody else wants you to do.
That's hilarious.
I absolutely agree with what you're saying. That because you're really, and I'm agreeing because I agree with you.
Right.
I think what you just said is wonderful, because what you're talking about is the dyadic structure of nature. Right. Is also there's a dyadic structure in society. There's pairing everywhere, in that couplehood. To just locate the problematic and the solution there would be erroneous and also tragic.
Right.
And I also love and want to amplify that however, that the romantic couple could be models for what you do at work and what you do here and what Democrats and Republicans do. And in fact, we think that and like that so much so that one of our other projects that we're thinking of doing before we get old is to start talking about that. It all began with an image of couples. The first story was the story of couplehood. It wasn't a story of an individual. Right. There were these two people. In the original story, they were side by side, parallel, and one of them didn't come from the other one.
Genesis 1:26, brother.
Genesis 1:26, and that one's not quoted in the Western world or in the churches. The other one's quoted. That's the way it began.
Right.
Therefore, that must be the way it should be. And that what we need to do is begin thinking about leadership in a new way. And that leadership should ultimately be dyadic. That there should be a co-president. They may be married or not married, but should be a co-president. And we're starting to think that we want to start identifying and relating to couples who have worked out their personal issues that have also had a positive impact on society, to begin laying into the culture the idea that someday, as the family is led by the couple, the government could be led by a couple, and that would restore the original picture that was in the Edenic story before the fall came. And so that doesn't mean that the romantic piece is the. I agree with that entirely. In fact,
we are in complete agreement.
we
now.
are in complete agreement.
Right. We've really come full circle.
And I'm happy that you language that, because that does bring the implicit into the explicit, where we are fully in agreement with what you're saying. And I really want to, before we go, thank you for freeing me from my aversion to spirituality, especially the spirituality of oneness, because then I felt suffocated.
Yeah.
But with your spirituality of the unique self as perspectival and and having its own uniqueness, and you're not lost in the one, I now feel I can breathe and I can participate in a conversation that was totally uninteresting to me before, because I thought that was, I sometimes call it pathological, but it was really just uninteresting. And I use pathology because I'm a clinician and I use that word to deal with stuff. But I think this is a beautiful and wonderful conversation that in some sense I feel even more affirmed by this conversation in what we're doing than I was before. And I really feel grateful for what the two of you have brought into our lives around rethinking the whole function of singularity, because now I can think about that in a very different way.
And if I could summarize what I think we are picking up from you, it's sort of like akin to Schilling saying that we think of the individual seeking eternity, but Schilling turned it around and said the eternity is lonely. Like the vast oneness out there is bored until it can find a particular in which to show up in. So the universe is seeking the individual, and is seeking us so that we can reflect back on the individual, that there is really this dynamic between the two. And that really is a new idea for us in this past year, which you all have particularly languaged, that and that it does make our specialness not a small part of our humanity, but an expression of the vastness of the cosmos around us. That that the particular is where the divine shows up, our divine nature, not merging into the oneness, that something's missing there. And so,
what a delight.
Yes.
And
yes.
what a delight. And one other thing about Imago that falls onto that is we have this thing about differentiation is a prerequisite for connection.
Can't do it without
Otherwise
being an
you're merged.
individual.
You're merged, you're not connected. When you're differentiated, you can connect. And what I'm loving is that we differentiated.
Right.
Now I feel really connected.
Right. No, it actually happened.
I want to hug you.
Thank God.
That's a good way to end.
Why don't we do that, huh?
That's an awesome way to
And
end.
we can do that too.
Just hug it out. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
What
you
an
so much.
amazing conversation.
Thank you so much.
We had our private hug back
Yeah.
here too, but
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
Thanks, sweetie.
What an amazing partner.
so a dance.
Awesome.
A dance.
Dance.
A dance. Yeah.
Thank you.
Do I get my
Thank
hat?
you.
Oh.
Can't pass without that.
I love what you said.
Beautiful.
The dancer
You're so
and the
lucky
dance.
and intelligent.
Connected.
That's amazing.
Beautiful.